Hi, everyone. Still trying to figure out this streaming thing. I think I'm doing it right. I still don't know how to zoom out on Instagram, so I apologize for that. I'm trying to make it not so close up on my face. But today, I am going to talk about social media engagement. And I plan to do this live. I had two other presentations today, so I figured while I am already potentially looking, decent because I've been presenting, I will go live to talk about a few things that have transpired over the last week or so. And I know I've been live a few times, but it's not going to stop anytime soon. So just as a heads up on that, I am using a streaming service and it doesn't let me necessarily see everyone that's participating. So, and I just realized for one of these, it has the wrong title, but whatever. We're getting there. We're trying to get this done. So I do have Instagram pulled up and I have Facebook pulled up, and I'm going to try to like go back and forth and check those. So hi to everyone that's watching on all of the various platforms. I'm going to go ahead and pull up what I want to say. So I did have to write a script for this because, as any of you know, who are like active with me know that I talk a lot. So I decided I would write a script. Like I said, this is one of probably many live videos that will continue to happen. This is what I ended up doing in 2021 and 2020 as well when these initial events were transpiring. So it's just one of the ways that I process and get things out. So here's what I wrote for what I wanted to say for today's topic of social media engagement. And I also have a Google file I'm going to share for those of you who haven't seen it yet. But recent discussions, including an article and some things about conference presentations, like not any recent conference presentations, but previous conference presentations have critiqued my social media engagement as well as some of my colleagues and have labeled it as potentially harmful and unethical. And my activity on social media has always been guided by a desire to leverage my platform for good, to disrupt systems of power, including white supremacy, and to ally with and amplify the voices of marginalized groups. The critiques that have once again appeared have prompted me to share the history of my engagement, not to center my narrative, but to offer transparency and insight into the intentions behind my actions. And when I'm addressing these critiques of my social media engagement and potentially others, if they do similar things I do, it's crucial to acknowledge that while I do have a platform that's dedicated to advocating for neurodiversity affirming practices and disrupting oppressive systems, it's relatively small in the grand scheme. I know I'm out here talking a lot, but there are larger systems and traditional platforms that still remain closed off to voices similar to mine, those that diverge from the norms and expectations of established power structures. And even more importantly, this exclusion extends even more critically to the voices of historically marginalized and oppressed groups, whose experiences and insights are essential for challenging the status quo and fostering genuine inclusivity within our communities. Despite not having been invited to those larger platforms, I am committed still to making the most of the spaces available to me. And I'm going to be talking about that, like some of the things about the larger platforms in more detail on a future live. But I just wanted to go over, like I said today, my engagement with social media. And over the many years that I've been on social media, my engagement has always been focused on different learning or different phases of being able to do it. And I'm constantly trying to improve. But the function and the reason why I've been on social media was to learn and also listen and leverage whatever reach I had at whatever point. I was still content I don't have that much of a reach to support and amplify those who are often sidelined. This path hasn't been chosen out of a desire for recognition, although some people would like to tell you that, but from a necessity to fill the gaps left by mainstream systems that frequently overlook or silence critical perspectives. My intention here, again, is not to overshadow, but to share to bring to light the importance of ethical, inclusive practices in our field and beyond. And I want to share the history of my engagement and the motivations behind it to provide context, because as far as I can tell, when my name has been brought up or my platforms have been brought up, no context is given. So I need to talk about that and to offer a clear understanding of my actions amidst rapidly evolving discussions. It's an effort for me to contribute to our collective growth, to foster a space for dialogue, and to encourage us all to think critically about how we can use our platforms, no matter the size, for positive change. I'm grateful for the opportunity to engage. I see lots of people coming in on the Instagram Live. I haven't checked over at the Facebook one yet. But this is, it's wonderful to have folks continue to engage with this. And I'm appreciative of everyone's work that they do to advocate for a more just and equitable society. So what I'm going to do now is I had spent quite some time trying to put together some information for a presentation. And I'm just basically going to continue reading off the script. Like, this is what I planned to say for that presentation. And then like I said, I'll check the streams and see if people had put in any questions. I'll share the Google Doc with everyone in case they want to explore further. So here is what I have to say about social media engagement. I am a cisgender woman. I'm white. I'm neurotypical as far as I know, heterosexual, and I'm a mother and a behavior analyst. I recognize the privileges afforded to me from each of these identities. And I hope that as I share today, it will resonate with others who have similar paths they've taken, and it will highlight a different path to take, especially as it relates to confronting the biases we have given the privileges offered to us by our race and other identities. So if you're listening and you maybe have similar privileges as I do, and maybe you'll learn a few things of different ways to engage on social media than you have been. Or if you're following me and have been for a few years, maybe you've already heard me say all these things. But nonetheless, I developed an early interest in ethics as a student of Dr. Bailey's at FSU in the early 2000s. Since that time, I have published papers, presented at numerous conferences, participated on podcasts, written a book chapter on the topic of ethics and social media. In addition to this, and as part of this work, I have completed additional training and consumed literature specifically on how to engage in active and compassionate listening, how to identify and confront biases, and how to navigate conversations with folks who disagree. I'm not laying out this brief resume to convince you to trust me or give me authority and credibility. I want you to know, though, that work has been done. So maybe you can reflect on what gaps might exist for you. And if there are areas that are outside of our field, especially, that you might want to explore to help in your own understanding of how to navigate some of these things that are happening within our field. And I say all of this full well knowing that I don't need to list off any of these things for people to know that we need to listen to the lived experiences of the consumers of our services, and that we need to value and take seriously the issues raised by neurodivergent perspectives about behavior analysis and any other aspect of science, education, and society. So I want to share a little story with you to illustrate my point. I was living in Panama City as a fresh graduate from FSU in 2008. I met William Keeley, and I have his permission to share this story. William is autistic, and he told me when he first met me that he didn't like behavior analysis. And I could tell he was not a big fan of me. I did a quick assessment and couldn't determine how trying to defend what I do for a living to him would be productive. So instead, I decided in that moment to listen to his concerns and make sure I was not practicing or training people to practice in ways that would be harmful to him or other autistics. That was all the way back in 2008, in case you missed it. I also valued his perspective and invited him to speak to the students at FSU that I was supervising. I reached out to William before putting this together, and this was his recollection of the encounter. Quote, "I came from a time and place where electric shocks were used. When we met, you were still almost a kid. I looked at myself and kind of felt bad that I had all this animosity toward this poor young woman. And then you invited me to come speak. I was flabbergasted. You also asked me questions about how I saw things and not from a checkoff list. I have tried for years to find people who are willing to see things from an autistic point of view. You were the very first. And I don't share this example to toot my own horn. I'm just sharing it to show in 2008, in that moment, how easy it was when I met him in person. And that was my first encounter with him, that I could listen, be curious, and learn from him. And a lot of the criticisms from our field seem to come up online in blogs, posts, comments, etc. And I've learned that creates an entirely different dynamic, but it doesn't mean we can't do the same things. It doesn't mean we can't be open and curious. I started engaging in social media spaces as an OG, I like to say, in the early 2000s when Yahoo groups were still a thing. And I talked about that in a panel in August. I don't know if anyone who's watching right now remembers that. Some of you all might not have even been born yet, but it was a thing. And people would go on there to like share resources and problem solve and things like that because nothing else really existed. We don't have time to go through the full history, although I guess today I could, but I'm not trying to take a really long time to talk about this. So, but basically, I went through several phases of how I engaged with social media, from actively engaging and participating to defending our science on comment threads, especially YouTube. And I talk about that in more detail in a few other spaces, to disconnect almost completely because the defending piece wasn't working out so well, to sharing resources with behavior analysts to level up their clinical skill sets with the Do Better movement starting in 2018. And then I did actually, well, you'll find out probably in a second here, but I did mostly disconnect from Facebook after 2020 for the reasons that I kind of listed earlier, people criticizing my activity for no apparent purpose. But anyway, so in 2020, after I deleted a comment from a neurodiversity self-advocate on a Facebook group that I started for the Do Better movement, I learned a lot of things about the impact of silencing folks from marginalized groups. It was in that moment that I decided we needed to commit to not deleting comments and to holding space for all perspectives so folks could learn from one another. It wasn't until I stopped trying to prove people wrong and truly unhooked from everything I was trained to do in my early career in terms of always defending our science. And I just leaned so hard into listening and trying to understand varying perspectives that I saw movement forward. And this movement involved both enhancing my already well-rounded clinical expertise at that point. 2020, I had been in the field for almost 15 years, to engage in a higher level of perspective taking and exploration of the impact of the interventions I was designing. Keep in mind, in 2008, I had already learned to design my interventions based on the perspectives of my client. And I only learned newer, better things when I started opening up and listening more to the criticisms of our field. I also was able to have new educational opportunities and collaboration with people who previously said very negative things about me and the work I was doing, from like criticizing ABA perspective and criticizing, you know, some of the methods that I thought were better, that were more neurodiversity affirming. And I still had learning to do, and I still have learning to do. And all of us have learning to do. People want and need to be heard. And when we do that, amazing things can happen. So there's a few take home points I want to leave before I close out this live. Like I said, if you're watching live on Facebook or anywhere right now, before I close, I will quickly check. I haven't seen like comments really coming through on Instagram, but I will check and see so I can try to address those too. First of all, we are human. Those of us who put ourselves out there and try to create spaces that uplift and affirm marginalized groups did so based on our values. And we committed to developing our skill sets to better understand how to create those spaces. Be kind, open, and curious. And if you have feedback for how to improve a space, don't throw ethics, bullying out into the world in various platforms. Do it with intentionality and a deep understanding of the work the folks are already doing to create said space. We could have just closed the group in 2020. I could have just closed it down. That was happening to a lot of groups at that time. Instead, we spent more hours than I can even count collaborating with the community and experts on these things. We didn't just think of ideas and go, oh, this is what we're going to do. We collaborated and worked with people and did as much learning as we possibly could. Could we have done it better? Of course we could have. I've mentioned that a few times, but we did the best we could with what we knew at the time. And we were really committed to having a safe space for people. And this laid the groundwork for some other things to happen as well, I would say. But we wanted to have a space that could safely exist for all and center the perspectives of marginalized groups, especially when those perspectives differ from the mainstream viewpoint. The creation of the expectations that we made, and it's in the Google Doc that I'm going to share, like have the images in case people missed them in 2020 when it was all going down. Those expectations modeled for other groups what to do and led to those groups not having to shut down and to continue to serve as large spaces for folks to connect and contact training opportunities relating to specialized protocols like PFA and SBT. I collaborated with and connected with folks from other Facebook groups who were saying, hey, I see what you're doing and do better. Could, help us out. And then they, because they're amazing, I'm going to have to give a shout out, especially to Hillary and Penny on this one. They just hit the ground running and created even better spaces, which is absolutely phenomenal. And people were able to use what we created as a jumping off point, what was included that, to my knowledge, in some research articles and possibly conference presentation as positive examples of how to use social media. Those spaces also learned from us what we were doing to create those spaces, but somehow people continue to try to say the work that we did was not good, was negative, was unethical, even though there was no violation found when we were reported to the ethics board. So that's a little standing off point. I didn't even have that in my script, but every time it just, so as I mentioned, other groups were able to do that. And so what I hope people will do, check out the Google Doc that I'm going to link. In my Instagram, it's in the link in the bio. It says how to respond to ABA criticisms, but use what we created as a jumping off point, as others have done, and continue to refine the process in ways that we confront our biases, disrupt white supremacy, and create affirming and inclusive environments. I also commented recently to someone that was asking about some things and said, as I mentioned, we did the best we could at that time with what information we were able to gather, and given the privileges I have and my upbringing in a Western culture, I guarantee you it wasn't as well informed as it, like there are other ways it could have been done, and they would have probably been better, but we were some of the only people digging in and trying to do it. And again, we were connecting with as many people who would do it with us. And we did everything we could possibly do with the skills we had at that time. So number two, I want to suggest that people interrogate any discomfort, fears, nervousness, etc., that come up for them when they see criticisms of ABA. All of this is valid. Your emotions are valid. And the solution is not necessarily what you've been taught or what you see others doing. Is it possible that if folks are exposed to a variety of discussions on various interventions, that some of those interventions will be misinformation or snake oil? Sure is. Is it possible that some of the things shared from various perspectives won't apply to the work you were doing with your client? Absolutely. Is there a risk that people might try these interventions or blindly incorporate these perspectives? Yep, definitely. We need to ask why. Why would people be using information from social media to fall victim to these things that we're concerned about? Why would that happen? Well, here, my perspective on it and what I've seen happen, they would do that when they don't have a solid understanding of how to make the best use of our science, how to critically analyze material, how to take what they've been exposed to, whether it's a journal article or a TikTok video. I want people to keep this in mind. This can happen when people consume the accepted literature too. People can read that and try to blindly apply it with their clients and cause harm because they have not been given the foundational skills to actually perform and analyze what they need to be doing. So if they haven't been given those skills to determine what, if any, use to make of these things within their practices, we're going to see these things happen. So this should encourage us to make sure we are training students analysts, and stakeholders on how to navigate the social media world we live in, and do so in a way that is affirming and uplifting of various perspectives that can tease apart, synthesize, and develop interventions that align with our science and the current understanding of the human experience. We can't just delete things and hope people choose behavior analytic methods by default. This not only prevents us from learning and growing as a field, it also silences the very people we are working with. We can't just tell people to blindly follow their supervisors and professors and never stray. This creates rigid and non-analytical behavior. It is 2024. Information is at our fingertips, and soon on our jacket pockets with the development of AI and things like the Humane Pin. We need to train folks on how to navigate diverse perspectives, stay humble in doing so, and engage in the problem-solving model. I saw Valeria put this on the Instagram feed, and engage in the problem-solving model of evidence-based practices, which means you incorporate the best available research or evidence, personal experiences, by the way, are data, the best interest of the client, and their clinical expertise. Gone are the days of ruling with an iron fist and telling people to practice a certain way because I said so, or this is how we do it. Okay. Lastly, check out the Google Doc. Like I said, I'll be posting the link on the feed before I close it. But if you're on Instagram, the link's in my bio. Check it out. It's chock full of additional resources and information. It has the chapter that I wrote on navigating criticisms. It has my analysis of how at the time in 2020, the ethics code that existed was a 2014 one. So it's like my analysis of how the code at that time, and it's even more so now, supports keeping comments and letting criticisms exist of our field. It has links to certain articles and other resources. And then, like I mentioned, it also has the images of the expectations we created for the community at the time. And it shows models of how to look at something that makes you uncomfortable and navigate it, and how to sit with that, and how to give space to marginalized voices. Reach out to me if you have any questions, and reflect on how you want the world to perceive behavior analysts. If you feel embarrassed, I've felt it quite a bit, to mention you are a behavior analyst, but it's because people just don't understand our science and what we do. Instead of having that be you're trying to defend it, let it be your motivation to model person-centered and humble practices. What I'm about to say right now might not make some people happy, but I'm going to say it. There's you can Google it, it'll show up. I remember the first time I saw someone say this from the neurodiversity affirming spaces, I was like, what are they talking about? And now I'm like, how did I ever believe that? We cannot save the world with behavior analysis, nor should we be trying to. We can collaborate with different worldviews, and by doing this, up level the understanding that everyone has of the human experience. We can commit to being open and curious instead of defensive and arrogant. Hate to break it to you, but we are not the best thing to walk this earth. We have a strong and amazing science that achieves outcomes like none other. But we are only as strong and amazing as we are in our ability to work with people and their values. And we can't do that if we aren't willing to listen and understand different perspectives. So that is what I had written out for sharing today. Thank you for those of you who hung out and watched. I see some agreement on the Instagram feed. As I mentioned, the link is in my bio, but I'm going to pop the link to the Google doc that I've been referencing a few times. And then also I am going to just check out Facebook and stuff. So if you're watching live on Instagram and you're like, what is she doing? That's what I'm doing right now. If anyone has thoughts or additional things they want to share, please do so. And I'll read the comments unless you prefer not to share them. Also, if you have feedback for me, I am always open for it. I am not perfect. I will never be perfect. And it looks like the feed that was supposed to be happening on the one page wasn't, again, for some reason. I don't know why that keeps happening. Someday I'll get this all figured out. But anyway, if you have any feedback for me, that I'm open to feedback, I will, as needed, improve what I do. But I do want, I'm not the person who is like supposed to just be the voice of everything. Obviously, I'm over here, I'm not autistic, but I did need to share this information today for the sole purpose of there was a lot of work and effort that went into a lot of things that happened again in 2020, and none of that has been identified in the various spaces that are talking about me or talking about that group. So for at the very least, I needed to share what some of the things were that we navigated, the amount of training and competency we worked on building compared to people who are criticizing us. I've asked and I have not received any information about like where the recommendations are coming from. I have not seen any citations on that or anything to suggest. But the last part of the Google Doc, as I mentioned, has, well, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the last part of the Google Doc has a list of articles that are really helpful as well. So if you're, trying to figure out what to do or how to navigate things, definitely check that out as well. Thanks, everyone. And as I mentioned, I'll be doing a few more of these, at least for the next week. I do need to focus on my actual projects, but I think, again, we're in a learning experience space at the moment. And we need to make sure we're tackling the things that need to be talked about. So, all right. Bye, everybody.